Inside a Venezuelan hospital during the food crisis. Venezuela is a country of shortages: water, electricity, medicine, baby formula, toilet paper, car parts, you name it. The devastating food shortage has highlighted the depth of the country's recession, which was triggered by the global collapse of oil prices that began in 2014 and made worse, many experts argue, by the government's socialist economic policies. There's been violent looting and massive lines in front of state-run supermarkets where people wait hours but often leave empty-handed. There was even a packed procession across an international bridge last Saturday as more than 35,000 Venezuelans walked to Cúcuta, Colombia, to buy food during a 12-hour opening of the border. There have been more than 3,000 protests in the country so far this year, and the Venezuelan Observatory of Social Conflicts says more than a quarter of them had to do with the food crisis. The fed-up and hungry crowds have a simple message: we want food. The shortage has affected everyone: the rich, the poor, and even the sick and injured in hospitals. At the University Hospital in Caracas, a piece of mortadella and oatmeal water pass for a well-balanced breakfast these days. A piece of bread with some cheese is another menu staple. Riots, looting, and protests raise immediate public safety concerns, but the harmful effects of a sustained food and medicine shortage could be long-lasting, nutritionist Dr. Pablo Hernandez says. We will have a generation of sick people, says the professor at the Central University of Venezuela in Caracas. We are getting sicker, not only physically, but mentally also. If the crisis were to continue for years, he says Venezuela could see a generation of kids with shorter life expectancies than their parents because of the poor environment they are growing up in. Working blindly. Those who defend the government often point out the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, recognized Venezuela in 2013 for meeting the UN Millennium Goal of having malnutrition. But Hernandez says that recognition and the numbers behind it were several years out of date. We have no official numbers right now, we are working blindly. He says a proper diet is particularly important for people suffering from chronic medical conditions. They have to consume even more calories than people that are not sick, due to the stress of being hospitalized. But at this major hospital in the country's capital, portions have been cut and patients receive the same limited variety of meals, regardless if their condition requires they eat or avoid certain foods. Protein is rare, and when it does appear on the tray, patients say it's hardly a treat. Noticeable effects. The meat doesn't taste well, he says, I rather not eat. In April, doctors sounded the alarm about a critical shortage of baby formula, particularly at J.M. de los Rios Children's Hospital in Caracas, where the supply ran out, leaving it to parents to try to track some down. The crisis lasted for about a month before donations started to help fill the gap. Doctors like Pablo Hernandez say they've already noticed the effects of malnutrition throughout Venezuelan society. We will find kids with problems at school, and workers absent from their jobs for the lack of iron in their diet. We don't know how many cases of anemia we are dealing with. Food rich in iron are either too expensive or too hard to find. In the western Venezuelan city of Maracaibo, the line of people waiting to buy food at a state-run supermarket spills into the streets. Tempers flare as some try to cut to the front of the line. The mood darkens when store managers announce that there's no food left on the shelves, only cleaning supplies. As she waits in the blistering heat, Maria Luisa Barrios shields herself from the sun with a piece of cardboard and complains, all they have is detergent. How am I going to eat detergent? Venezuela's second largest city, Maracaibo is one of the hardest hit places in a country that seems to be running out of almost everything from bread to beer, from car parts to electricity. What started as persistent food shortages under President Hugo Chavez has turned into a food crisis under the Nicolas Maduro government, elected in 2013. A tour of Maracaibo last month showed the crisis is especially dire. Socialist economic policies that have put the government in charge of much of the country's food production and distribution have dramatically reduced the supply of rice, pasta, milk, and other basic staples. Meanwhile, falling prices for oil, which accounts for nearly all of Venezuela's export income, mean President Maduro's government has far less money to import food. Where there's food, looting follows. The result is that in the country with the world's largest oil reserves, people are ransacking grocery stores, restaurants, warehouses, and even food delivery trucks. A Venezuelan monitoring group, Observatory for Violence, says there are about 10 lootings per day around the country, with food riots sometimes turning deadly. 4 people were killed during separate incidents last week as looters clashed with security forces. More than 400 people were arrested in the coastal city of Cumana, which was briefly placed under a de facto curfew after 20 stores were cleaned out. If the vote is held this year, new elections would be called. But electoral authorities, who are loyal to the president, are trying to delay the balloting until next year. Should that happen and Maduro loses a likely outcome given the magnitude of the country's problems, he would be replaced by his vice president and the ruling Socialist Party would remain in power. Last month, Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the OAS, blasted Maduro for sabotaging the recall effort. To deny the people that vote, to deny them the possibility of deciding, would make you just another petty dictator, like so many this hemisphere has had, Almagro wrote in an open letter to the Venezuelan leader. Maracaibo sits just 130 kilometers from the Colombian border, which aggravates the city's food shortages. Cheap government-subsidized food which sells for less than the cost of production is often smuggled into Colombia, where it is sold for huge profits. Maracaibo used to be a showcase for progress. It was built on the shores of Lake Maracaibo, where Venezuela first struck oil a century ago. Maracaibo is home to the country's first bank, movie theater, and public lighting system. Now, the city has become a symbol of degradation and breakdowns. Adding to the frustrations over food shortages, some neighborhoods in the city go without power for up to 12 hours a day. That's due to a nationwide electricity shortage caused by an El Niño-induced drought and lack of maintenance of government-run power plants and grids. Maracaibo intersections become clogged with vehicles because the traffic lights don't work. The power outages knock out fans and air conditioners in one of the country's hottest cities, where the temperature often nears 40 C. In a working-class barrio north of the city center, Juliday Ruiz says that blackouts often force her and the 13 other adults living in her house plus a scrum of kids into the street to seek relief from the heat in the middle of the night. When the power comes back on, they rush to wash clothes, cook lunch, and take care of other chores that require electricity. Outages affecting elderly man's dialysis. Family patriarch Rodolfo Ruiz, a 79-year-old retired school clerk, points out that his kidneys are failing. When the lights go out, so does his dialysis machine. Dialysis is the only thing keeping me alive, he says. Rather than working overtime to solve these problems, Maracaibo officials are hamstrung by bizarre rules. At City Hall, the building was closed on a recent Friday morning. To save electricity, Maduro in April ordered public employees to work just 2 days per week. The decree was lifted this month, but government workers are still on reduced hours. Mayor Evelyn Rosales was working out of the Transportation Department, one of the few functioning city offices. She claims the Maduro government is sabotaging her city. Oil royalties and other federal monies make up 80% of her budget. But Rosales claims Maduro is withholding these funds because she belongs to an opposition party that's trying to oust him through a recall election. In addition, her husband is one of Venezuela's best-known political prisoners. A former mayor, governor, and presidential candidate, Manuel Rosales, was arrested 8 months ago on what human rights groups call trumped-up charges. The Maduro government did not respond to requests for comment. But the president often blames the country's crisis on the opposition, which he claims is hoarding food, bombing power plants and plotting coups. Asked about this, Rosales just rolls her eyes. Venezuela is upside down, she says. It's like Alice in Wonderland.